You flooded my inbox with questions about staying safe on the pickleball courts during this COVID crisis. Now, if you ask me about pickleball or health and wellness, I'm happy to answer those. I've shied away from talking about this because it's totally outside of my area of expertise. But today, I have someone who can help us to get these questions answered. Hey everybody, it's CJ Johnson. If you're new to Better Pickleball, welcome. We help players over 50 live their best lives on and off the pickleball courts. If you want to make sure that you get the latest updates from this channel, hit the subscribe button and then the bell notification. Today, I'd like to welcome Dr. Sarah Webb to the Better Pickleball channel. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Now, besides being an avid pickleball player, you are a pathologist and you have some pretty noteworthy credentials. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, for the purposes of this discussion of viruses, my credentials include that I was the head of a microbiology department at a hospital for many years and also the head of the infection control committee.
Dr. Webb, you recently wrote the return to play guidelines for the City of Seattle Park and Rec Department, and I'm going to be including a link to those at the end of this video. So if you'd like a copy, make sure that you stay around. I think it's important to say that we're recording this in early August, the first week of August 2020. And obviously, things are always changing. But right now, in general, is it safe to be out playing pickleball?
I think it's very safe outside, as long as where you live is in the correct phase that it's allowed, and you follow some certain guidelines, which we're going to talk about.
So before we get into those guidelines, are there certain groups of people who should not be playing pickleball today?
I don't want to say that they shouldn't be playing, but there's some people that should be a lot more cautious than other people. People that have immune problems, someone who's obese, or has a serious health condition, they should consider only playing with the family group or with small groups of people and not do drop-in pickleball. Obviously, anyone who's been exposed to someone who has COVID shouldn't be playing for 14 days. That goes without saying.
I love the way you broke down the guidelines: arrival, during play, between games, and then leaving the courts. So, what should we be doing when we arrive at the pickleball courts?
Um, you should arrive not too long before your game so that you don't congregate in the parking lot. And when you're entering the courts, try not to touch the fence or the gates to get in. But if you do, be sure to sanitize your hands. And at any rate, everybody should be sanitizing their hands right before they play. Um, be sure to wear your mask when you're coming to the court and when you're putting your bag down and getting your paddles and your balls out. And also wear a mask when you're putting up nets. One other thing to think about is to have some kind of way of keeping track of who is playing. Having a sign-up sheet is kind of problematic because of having a pin and having to clean the pin. I personally am just keeping track of who's playing every day, but not everybody has somebody like me that's willing to do that. But that's one thing to think about.
All right, now we're getting ready to play. What do we need to know during the game?
As far as masks go, obviously it would be optimal if everyone wore masks, but I realize that some people find them uncomfortable. I find them uncomfortable if it's hot. Now, you can breathe fine in a mask. In fact, an anesthesiologist did a recent study on YouTube where he wore 6 masks and he measured his oxygen and carbon dioxide, and they were totally normal. So you can breathe, but it is uncomfortable. So I don't think that you have to wear a mask if you're playing outside. However, if you have a partner that feels more comfortable wearing a mask, I think it's only right that you wear one. Now, as far as the balls, I sanitize the balls at home with a 10% solution of Clorox. And then at the court, I sanitize them with either wipes or hand sanitizer. The USAPA recommended that everyone have their own ball, and we tried that and we just found it untenable. People cannot remember that. So, what I think works is for each court to have their own ball, either a different color ball or you can mark it with a marker. And when the ball goes between courts, people should either kick it back or tap it with their paddle back instead of picking it up and throwing it back. And then in between games, when people change courts, the ball should be sanitized. As far as the paddles, uh, don't stack paddles. You probably won't have to at this point because there shouldn't be that many people on the courts. In Seattle, we could only have 5 people per court. And so we don't really have to stack. But if you did, some alternatives would be to hang the paddles in the fence or lay them on the ground in order, but just be sure to do so that they're so far enough apart that people don't congregate when they're going to get their paddles. And don't tap your paddles after a game, just wave them at people.
Now, Sarah, you told me something about gloves that I was not aware of. Can you please tell everybody else?
Now, must mention that the USAPA did recommend in their guidelines wearing gloves, but I don't think they read the scientific literature before they did that. Sorry, USAPA, I love you, but uh, these type of gloves are not made to keep out viruses. They're just made to keep out blood and body fluids. And they're very porous, and viruses actually can go through them. And when you sweat, they get even more porous. And when you sweat, all kinds of bacteria builds up inside them, and it's really not, it's not very appetizing. Um, Also, disposable gloves are very difficult to take off properly unless you're a medical personnel, and you can usually contaminate your hands taking them off. And finally, disposable gloves are more likely to attract viruses in your hands because of the smooth surface. And so, if you wear the gloves and then touch your face, you're more likely to get virus on your face than you would if it was just your hands.
In addition to the disposable gloves, I've seen people wearing, golf gloves, racquetball gloves, those types of things. Are those any different from the disposable gloves?
No, in fact, those are probably even more porous because a lot of them have quite large holes in them.
I'm going to guess that because this is such a social game, one of the more challenging times for us as pickleball players is in between games. Dr. Webb, what should we be doing?
I agree with you that that's a problematic time. We need to remember not to congregate around benches. And usually, most pickleball courts that I've played on don't have enough benches for people to sit. So people need to bring their own chairs if they want to sit, and make sure to space those chairs 6 feet apart. And don't sit in other people's chairs because you might touch their chair. And it's probably a good idea to wear a mask when you're not playing, even if you're 6 feet sitting 6 feet apart.
Old habits die hard, and it doesn't take long to see things change once we get to the courts. Sarah, what are the biggest mistakes that you see people making on the courts?
Well, as we just mentioned, in between games, I've seen people congregating to talk. I've seen people, if they do this everywhere, pull their mask down to talk to somebody. They forget when the game's over or when the session is over to go take down the nets. They just run to take down the nets without going to get their masks, putting their masks back on. Um, Now, the I mentioned hitting balls back to the adjacent court. That's really hard to remember, and people pick up the balls a lot. It's really hard to remember to hit them back with your paddle or your foot. The other thing is, I've seen people congregate when going to pick up their paddles when they're stacked in a fence or on the ground. People get too close because they're excited they want to get to the court. I've seen people sitting in other people's chairs.
So, Dr. Webb, at the top of this, you told us that these guidelines were for outdoor pickleball. What about indoor pickleball?
I really don't think indoor pickleball is safe at this point. However, if you were to consider it, I would only do it if you had a family group or possibly if you had a small group of just 4 people that you played with, only with those people.
We know that you are going to have some questions about the information that Dr. Webb shared with us today. And so her and I have decided that we're going to take this conversation over to Pickleball List. If you would like to join us, you can click on the show notes below and all the information will be over there. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your expertise with everyone in the Better Pickleball community.
You're welcome. And thank you for sharing your expertise in pickleball and health with me on your YouTube channel.
You're very welcome. If you click this link, you'll find the guidelines that I promised you earlier in this show. If you got value, give it a thumbs up and share this with your pickleball playing friends, because together we can train smart, live bold, and age well.